Alright. Finally, we're going to do the hero spotlight on Zephiel, the Liberator. This guy is pretty damn powerful. You know, there's a lot of abilities you can put on him and not go wrong with. I'm going to show you a couple of builds and talk about a couple of skills that'll go really well on him. Exax, of course. Sound like I said Exax. Exax. Is a Might 16 sword, which is one of the best. Of course, it's tied with, like, I don't know, a multitude of other Might 16 swords. But its special ability here is pretty killer in the fact that it, in some way, kind of makes it 20 might by reducing the enemy's defense by 4. He comes with Retribution, Reprisal, Life and Death, and Wary Fighter. Now, Life and Death and Wary Fighter really conflict a lot. So when you're building Zephiel, you want to focus on one or the other. The majority of the meta will tell you to completely ignore Life and Death, but I don't want to ignore it. I'll get to it in a minute. More meta, more best build would probably be, of course, Exax. I don't think I'll talk about giving him any other... Actually, you know what? I'll get this out of the way immediately. Brave Sword Plus. That's probably his only potential other sword weapon you might consider giving Zephiel. I would highly recommend against that. One of Zephiel's biggest features is his attack stat. Now, if you take away his Exax and give him the Brave Sword Plus, which I don't remember exactly its might, but it's not very high. If you give him Brave Sword, you essentially neuter his attack stat. And the fact that it's so high in the first place makes him competitive. And if you take, like, even 4 points away from that, he stops being the competitive beast that he is. Or rather, if I didn't have attack on him already, he would be at 51. If you drop that anywhere below 50, you might as well forget about using him. Well, I mean, not forget about using him, but come on. Anyway, jumping back into it, he comes with Retribution and Reprisal, which are okay when you think about it, but when you look at his defense stat and his Wary Fighter, he's actually not built to actually take damage. So in the end, these become extremely inconsistent, and you end up getting, like, no value out of them. Because of his high defense stat, of course, the best specials to give him are obviously Bonfire and Ignis. Probably Ignis would be a much better choice in this case, utilizing the higher percentage of this, which is probably one of the highest defenses in the game. But of course, he's an armored unit. He's actually got mediocre resistance too, which is pretty nice. I guess I kind of skipped over the support ability. With armored characters, pretty much the most important thing is their lack of mobility. You gotta make up for that somehow. I think the best ones are generally Pivot, and Swap, because they allow you the greatest range of mobility. I can actually make Zephiel move 3 squares if I have my units in the proper spots. And that's really good. It gets him where he needs to go. He really needs that mobility to, so he's not running around chasing ranged units. So I'm going to jump into the build that I already have, which is the attack +3 and the wary fighter. He has threat and attack, by the way, because it synergizes with his execs and this particular build here, because it keeps him tanky, keeps him very competitive. Essentially, you're using his two biggest features, his attack and defense stat, and you're just making his better, and you're making the enemies worse. In so doing, you reduce the damage Zephiel takes, and increase the damage he dishes out. This makes him one hell of a 1v1 duelist. It's very straightforward. He's very slow. Obviously, you don't want him to be taking any hits. So by keeping his HP high, which is easy because of his high defense, he won't be doubled. And it's not like he's going to be doing any doubling anytime soon anyway, so wary fighter is nothing but benefit. The reason for attack +3, as opposed to other meta abilities, and I'll explain why these other meta abilities for the A slot would be terrible in a second, but attack +3, the reason why I want this here is because I'm going to be using him to attack just as much as I defend, or rather counterattack. He'll be taking a hit, he'll attack back, and then on the following turn I'll attack again with him. Essentially, that's like, it's almost like a death blow. You're getting all 6 of the benefit. Now with death blow, you don't necessarily want to be using that one because Zephiel doesn't always have the opportunity to counter. In the case of like bow units or mages, they'll just duck behind a wall or anything that's available that Zephiel can't chase them around and attack them from range. Especially if you're trying to use Zephiel as a defense unit, that would definitely pose a problem. He's primarily an enemy phase unit, and you lose out on the benefit of having that increased attack during the enemy phase because Death Blow only activates during your phase, when you attack. It's not a terrible skill by any means, but I feel like attack +3 would be better in this case. Fury is another meta A slot, which actually would be terrible on Zephiel. Though, when you think about it, it would increase his attack, his speed, resistance, and defense. What would be wrong about that? The fact that when you increase all of these stats so much, the drawback is you take 6 damage in every combat. That can drain his HP so fucking fast. So absolutely fast. Especially when the point of him in the first place is not to be taking that much damage for free in the first place. This is 6 damage that's just gonna happen no matter what, regardless of who attacked when and how much damage they did in the first place. You can't afford to be taking 6 free damage every single combat. So Fury wouldn't work on Zephiel because you would be losing out on this defense value. That's damage going right past that. You lose so much value out of that. Therefore, in this case, attack is pretty much a clear option, surprisingly. So I think I've talked enough about that build. Now here is the controversial one. This is the one that I got a little bit of flack for in my Discord because I was sharing builds for Zephiel. And I was like, hey, Zephiel comes with life and death. I don't want to completely discount this fact. I want to find a way to use it. Now, as you can see, now that I have life and death equipped, his stats have kind of flip-flopped. And you could immediately see that possibly you wouldn't want to be using Life and Death, because now I am all of a sudden doing a 180 on the build I just talked about, and I just took away his very, very competitive defense stat, and I made it just barely above average. There's a reason for this. Because of his slow speed, even though it was increased slightly, that doesn't matter. He's generally not going to be doubling many things. Maybe he'll double a Reinhardt if he can somehow magically get close enough in the first place and not die. But that's not what we're going for here. This is going to sound absolutely weird, but Life and Death is on here to purposely lower his defense. When you do that, he'll take more damage, obviously. Very obviously. I don't have to tell you that. But I tell you that because when his HP goes down further when it otherwise normally would, it activates Brash Assault. If he kept his defense and resistance values, chances are extremely high he's not going to drop into the range to activate Brash Assault by the time it comes back to your turn again. So tell me, what's worse than taking a single hit from Zephiel? Taking 2 hits from Zephiel. That is absolutely punishing. And he can do it too. Because once he goes in that range, you're gonna put him against somebody who's gonna counter, but he's got the bulk to take the hit and continue swinging. By the time all of this is said and done, he'll probably be nice and injured and tired, which is why you need a very good team synergy setup to make use of this build. It increases his attack substantially, so it makes his attacks more punishing. So it's like really high risk, really high reward. If you can pull it off, you can pretty much annihilate everybody. There's very little they can do about it. Until afterward. After you nuke something, he's going to be very vulnerable because you lowered his defense and resistance stats. Which is why the team synergy is extremely important. What I usually do on my Armor Emblem team, and I feel like this build would be best utilized in an Armor Emblem team, not just used willy-nilly, because you would fortify armor with him, and then you would also hone armor with him, and I have both of those in Sheena and Gwendolyn. Zephiel will pivot across Gwendolyn, utilizing the 2 buffs that he got, and they look fantastic when he's buffed by those, by the way. He'll pivot into battle, I'll let him take a hit, and then on the following turn, he'll have low enough HP to activate Brash Assault, and then he will absolutely nuke anything that I decided to make him smite. Since I made him pivot around Gwendolyn, Gwendolyn is equipped with Reposition, and will send him to the other side of Gwendolyn, essentially making her tank for the team now. And behind Gwendolyn is usually Sheena. She's my foe healer, she's got Reciprocal Aid and Renewal. She'll pretty much heal Zephiel back to full again, and I'll send him back out there to do something similar. It actually works out pretty well. I might show you guys in a future video. So now that I've talked about these 2 builds, I want to talk about a couple other skills you could potentially give Zephiel. He's a very well-rounded character, all things considered. He's very slow, and he only moves 1 space. Yet, even with these very glaring weaknesses, he is an incredibly strong unit. Incredibly strong. Which makes him a very good candidate for Heavy Blade. The only drawback with that is the distant counter meta. So now I'm like kind of talking two skills at once. I'll just talk about Heavy Blade right now. Because of his super high attack, if I take away life and death, it's just going to drop to 51. 51 base is very respectable. And when I say base, I'm factoring in the weapon. Very respectable. A slots usually are used to increase the already high attack in the first place. Most units can only hope to get into the 50s with the assistance of an offensive A slot. Zephiel doesn't even need that. Therefore, you open up a whole world of opportunity with different A abilities. Because you don't have to increase his attack any further. It's highly recommended, however, but that's the meta. Let me just put it back to this. I actually generally get more value out of this build, by the way. It's just the other one is unique and fun to use sometimes, but not really all the time. It's got a very high difficulty of use, which can turn the fun into not fun quickly. But it is fun to use on occasion. Now, distant counter is very... You can give him the distant counter quick riposte combo. You can essentially turn Zephiel into a Sword Hector. Yeah, I can see Zephiel getting a lot of value out of distant counter and quick riposte. But you would have to have a spare Hector laying around somewhere to give him distant counter in the first place. Now, for most of you out there, that's probably not realistic. Most of us will hope to even get one Hector in the first place. And if you have a Hector, you're probably not just gonna sack him for a Zephiel. So if you were somehow magic enough, or spent money to try and get more than one Hector in the first place, then this would be more realistic. Otherwise, I feel like the two builds that I showed you are much more practical and very, very free-to-play oriented. Especially this one right here. You can find threat and attack anywhere, very easily. If you throw them on an Armor Emblem team, it's very easy to find Armor Emblem buffs. I'm sure plenty of us have more than one Draug at our disposal. Ugh. Getting tongue-tied. An attack is extremely easy to find too. It can actually list off two units that have it. Cherish and Gordon. And that's where Zephiel got his, is from Gordon. So if you do have a Zephiel and you've been kind of on the fence about making him 5-star, maybe you don't have any good sword units or something like that, he is definitely a very strong candidate to take that slot on your team. Sure, he's got like 2 glaring weak points, but he more than makes up with it. He's a fantastic unit, and I'm actually glad people told me to 5-star him. Other than Hector, he is the second most important character on an Armor Emblem team. I believe hands down. Even more important than Sheena and her Fortify, more important than Gwendolyn and her Hone. Zephiel is a character that you can't afford not to have. And you fucking should have him, too. At least a 3-star. Come on, guys. That was a bit of a long one, but I had a lot to say about Zephiel. Pretty much all good. Pretty much all good. A lot of stuff on my mind's been floating around in there for a week, been meaning to do this video for a while. Really hope you like the video and what I had to say about Zephiel. And I'll catch you in the next Hero Spotlight, whoever that may be.